How do we train ourselves to find motivation and not be lazy? Because I feel like there's a lot of laziness out there, or there's moments of motivation, but then it falls back into a laziness structured schedule. How do we train our minds and our body to be motivated towards a goal and not stay lazy?
Yeah. Well, at first, it's know thyself, because we're all different. And so one of the attributes I talk about in the book is discipline. And what I had to do with discipline was actively separate discipline from self-discipipline.
What's the difference?
Okay, well, the difference is that self-discipline is internally focused. Okay, self-discipline is about managing oneself, and it has very little to do with external requirements, right? So you or I can decide to get in shape, for example, and we can change our diet, we can work out every day. The external environment doesn't have a lot of say in that, in us achieving that accomplishment. So self-discipline is about managing the internal. Discipline, the way I talk about it in the book, is about achieving that long-term goal. These are those long-term goals that are going to take a while to achieve, and the external world has a say. So getting that promotion, writing that book, becoming the famous singer, becoming a Navy SEAL, right? The external world has, starting a podcast, right? The external world has a say in whether or not you do that, and the discipline that is required to move through those wickets takes adaptability, it takes flexibility, it takes the ability to not get seduced by the highs, the successes, and not get crushed by the failures, and continue to move towards that goal. And what I found was, because I'm a very unself-disciplined person. I don't have a lot, right? And so I had to separate this, because I've been able to achieve a lot of goals in my life. I say, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is if you are overly, so those with very high self-discipline, sometimes, this is not exclusive, but sometimes have trouble achieving long-term goals, because the achievement of long-term goals often takes an ability and by necessity to march into the unknown, into uncertainty, which is going to throw you off routine and throw you out of certainty. The self-disciplined person, the very self-disciplined, likes routine, likes certainty, right? That's how it's structure. I mean, that's what it is. Yeah. And so moving towards a goal like that takes oftentimes being able to adapt out of structure, and say, well, I can't do that. Like I'm normal. I'd have to just go in. I have to go in unknowing, right? Now, the most successful people are those who have both self-discipline and discipline, right? In terms of staying motivated for a goal, the way I would do it by knowing myself is I would understanding I'm not a very self-disciplined person, I would simply try to chunk a goal into smaller pieces, right? So if I want to lose weight, then I can say, well, that's why cheat days are actually good for me, right? Yeah. Because I can say, okay, I'm gonna take this piece of it and move. So I chunk my reward system in a different way. But I think the way one stays motivated towards a goal is highly subjective, but it would, in my kind of through my thought process and my experience, involve an active or one to actively map out a reward system that helps someone move through that.
Sort of creating a reward system first for the goal in order to help you stay motivated. So
depending on how you show up.
Not just say like, okay, my goal is to achieve this thing. It's going to take me 3 years to accomplish it.
Right.
And that's the only reward I'm going to get in those 3 years. But how can I reward myself every day for an action I take, every month for a milestone, every year for getting closer? So focusing on the reward system for ourselves.
And this is neurobiological, because dopamine, the neurotransmitter, is you get hits of dopamine when you, as a reward, when you achieve things. There's many ways you get dopamine, but one of the ways is when you achieve things. So if you're able to effectively create a reward system that means something to you, it can't be kind of inert, right? So if I want to run a marathon and I can barely run to my mailbox, right? Then maybe buying some running shoes and putting them on one morning is enough of a reward system to get a dopamine hit. Yeah. As someone who runs somewhat frequently, and you probably identify with this, just putting on our shoes one morning is probably not going to give us that dopamine hit. We got to extend that. We got to extend that task a little bit, so that
you've already accomplished a lot of something. You have to push beyond it.
You have to push beyond it to get that reward system, so it becomes subjective.
What would you say, 20 years as a Navy SEAL at different levels, and you were deployed how many different times? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Well, 13 and some change, yeah. So
deployments between, 6 months and over a year?
Yeah, I never did year long, but anywhere between 3 months to 6 months usually.
And this is Iraq and Afghanistan?
For the most part, yeah.
And other places maybe you're not allowed to talk about. Yeah. What would you say of that 20-year experience was the most challenging experience for you? Was it something within a mission? Was it learning how to develop as a leader? Was it having a relationship with your wife during that time? What was the most challenging point for you?
Yeah, the most challenging thing, ironically, wasn't the job because we were all so prepared for the job, and we were around just the best people in the world. So the trust and the camaraderie was, to this day, I look back on it very fondly, right?
Wow. So not the day-to-day job.
No,
you mean even just like the missions you went out on?
Yeah, that wasn't challenging. I think if I were to say, the first and foremost was probably having to leave the family. When you have to say goodbye to your family for a stint, whether it's 3 months or 6 months, or some folks are deploying for a year, right? That is a rough deal that not many people can capture. Not many people with families can capture that, when you have to say goodbye to your kids and your wife for that. Okay, well, see you in however. And then to add on to that, understanding their stress, or at least my kids were a little bit smaller, but understanding my wife's stress, knowing that I was going someplace and it was dangerous.
Contact
yeah, well, I mean, luckily with today's technology, contact was fairly easy, but we found again, ironically, we found that daily contact was never a good idea, because what happens is you establish a routine.
You get comfortable.
You get comfortable. So something happens. I'm working. I'm overseas in something. I have a mission that goes long or whatever, and I don't get to call her that day. Well, suddenly she's worried. And it also makes time actually seem slower.
Interesting.
So we decided we were only going to talk usually once a week. My son, who had a real trouble, he was young. I mean, he was born in 05, so he was by the time he was 2, he was having trouble with me deploying. And every time I went, it was rough on him. And we almost had to. Well, we literally had to just decide not to. I was not going to talk to him on the phone. It was too hard for him. He had to basically kind of forget me.
Oh my gosh! So he had to compartmentalize as a child.
Yeah.
In order
we had to help him compartmentalize.
Survive.
Yeah.
And not go depressed or be stressed, because that's one of the attributes you talk about is compartmentalization.
Yeah.
How do you do that if you're an emotional human being you have these deep connections to your family and friends? How do you just detach, in a sense, and become more machine-like for a period of time, and then allow yourself to feel deeply in other moments?
Well, it never goes away, and I think the attributes, the way I talk about compartmentalization and the attribute is more kind of surrounded by the way our brain functions and processes information, versus I'm going to block something out so I don't have to think about it. However, I think most team guys, SEALs, Spec Ops guys, have a very high ability to compartmentalize away from things, block out things that are painful. And I know that about me. And I know that about my buddies, because you have to, because war sucks, and at the end of the day, the mission has to be accomplished, so if something gnarly happens on a mission, you can't sit there. These movies that show these extended scenes of people, mourning when their buddy goes down or whatever, like, oh my God, it doesn't happen. No, you don't have that time. You have to you have to win the gunfight, right? Because if you don't, then all of you won't make it home, right? So you have to, and I think the training allows you to do that. The training is so intense and so so effective that it requires you to compartmentalize. Training teaches you to compartmentalize. You become very, very good at it. Now, that can be a detriment in a relationship. So I think those of us who were able to recognize that actively try not to do that with our families. And so it becomes much more of a precision tool versus a frenetic thing that just happens without us having control over it.
What was the moment that was the scariest for you when you were deployed, where you thought like, I may not make it? Or our team may not make it, or this is a really bad. I guess you're training for bad situations all the time.
Yeah,
but was there ever a moment you were like, I don't know if we're going to get out of this?
No, I was fortunate not to have that moment. I say that with immense gratitude, because I know there's a lot of friends of mine who didn't have that can't say that they had those moments where they said that, but no, I was fortunate enough to be always in a position, and my team was always in a position that we had prepared, planned, and executed in a way that was highly effective, so that when things went wrong, because things always go sideways, we had complete, or near complete control, or we understood the pathways we needed to to go throughout it. But I say that also, this comes back to compartmentalization. One of the things that you have to be able to do when shit goes sideways is to not focus on that thought you just brought up, right? The focus is not, oh my God, I don't think I'm going to get out of this. The focus is, how do I get out of this? So the mental acuity attributes, which are situation awareness, compartmentalization, task switching, and then learnability, right? So that's how information is coming in, how we're processing it and prioritizing, how we're switching between the necessary tasks, and then how we're learning from our decisions, right? So I talk about the parachute malfunction in the context of that. But ultimately, to even be able to do that in the first place, it requires a forebrain dominance, in the sense that you're not letting your autonomic system take over into a fight-flight response, and you're able to think through stress, challenge, and uncertainty in the sense of say, okay, what can I control right now? And this is where trust in your teammates comes in, because now I have a team. I mean, I can say this with great pride and gratitude. I can remember literally walking in areas, when we were overseas, and thinking, man, this is a bad area.
Sketchy.
Right? This is sketchy, and having complete and utter faith, right? Because I was with my teammates, right? I was around people who I trusted. I knew that if something went wrong, we'd be able to handle it, And so I think that's a necessity when you do this type of stuff.
When you're going out on a mission, what's the process like of preparing for that mission? Are you planning more for all the things that could go wrong and how to get out of that situation? Or is it planning for, here's exactly how we would like it to go right,
yeah,
but let's also have a exit plan or a plan for when things go wrong?
It's the latter. It's you plan the mission as you'd like it to go, and then you inside of that planning you build contingencies within each factor.
So when this doesn't go as planned,
right. So
what are the 3 ways to get out?
Yeah. So just like any athlete would understand, or so a quarterback coming out of a snap would say, well, I have 2 or 3 or 4 plays I can fall back on depending on how this line shapes up, right? You have the same thing, this is where experience matters. You do it over and over again. It's okay, well, as we're coming in on insertion, there's a few things that could go wrong. So if this, then that, if this, then that. And you kind of do that throughout the phase planning. But then there's what we call the 80-20 rule, and that is you get to 80% of certainty, and then you recognize that 20% is just out of your control. And that's where confidence comes. You say, hey, if something happens outside that 20%, we will figure it out on the fly, because we're not going to figure out everything, and it's Murphy's law will dictate that something happens that we haven't thought of, so you prepare yourself to deal with uncertainty.
How do you train your mind to deal with chaos in the moment so that you don't freak out and freeze up, but you actually turn on a level of focus and attention towards achieving that goal?
Yeah, so I think we're predisposed, each one of us, to what I've called, actually Huberman and I both have called this, is the autonomic set point. At what point do we start flipping into an autonomic response, into fight flight, where our system starts taking over and our forebrain starts coming offline. If you and I use boiling point as the average, most of us might be average. There are those who start really freaking out at like 190. So 212 is the average. At 190 degrees, they're starting to freak out.
Right.
There are people who it takes till like 230
to boil.
Boil, right? I think that the guys who make it through that training are predisposed to have a higher set point, first of all. In other words, we tend to, when bad things start to happen, we tend to slow down and start thinking through it, versus get all hyped up. It's funny. I live in a neighborhood, and in my neighborhood, there's 4 other Navy SEALs in the neighborhood. There's one across the street, one down the road. One.
Must be nice.
Well, it is nice, because they're great dudes and they're great neighbors. But I remember my wife once saying, she said, "Hey, I'm so glad these guys are here in the neighborhood." I was like, "Why?" So she said, "Because if something went wrong, I know I could go to them and they'd act like you act." And I said, "Well, tell me." I said, "Because if something happens, they would immediately calm down and they'd start working the problem, right?" And so I think I think we show up predisposed. Training to it is difficult, and I think so. Here we're actually working on some stuff to help teach people to do that. But it comes down to understanding your own neurology, and it comes down to understanding that here's how you have to think through situations under stress, and then it's going to be about putting yourself into deliberate stress to practice that. You can't practice this type of thinking if you're not in stress.
You
right?
need
So
to put yourself
you
in
need
that.
to put yourself in that.
What are some things civilians could do to practice stressful moments on a daily basis where it doesn't hurt them, but it's actually preparing them? I talk about every day I think you should be experiencing some type of pain, something that's uncomfortable.
Right.
Seeking discomfort.
Yes.
Whether it be through a 10-minute workout, whether it be through a longer run, it doesn't matter what it is, an uncomfortable conversation.
Yes.
We should be doing this every day in a structured environment that allows us to grow.
Yes.
What do you think are some ways we could do this that's not putting us in harm's way or physically hurting ourselves?
Yeah, I can't answer that because it's so subjective. I can give some ideas, and you just gave some. I mean, some people are very social people, so starting a conversation with a stranger is a piece of cake, right? For me, that would be hard, right? Starting a conversation with a stranger would be hard. So that might be something I do. Giving a presentation, public speaking for people is tough. So volunteering to give that presentation is a great way for a lot of people because that makes them anxious, So working out for some is like, for some people, they've developed a system where that pain point of working out is something they highly enjoy, right? So they're not practicing it, So someone should look at their own makeup and ask themselves what fright. Well, in fear, again, it doesn't have to go all the way to fear. Fear is interesting because it's actually a combination of two things. It's a combination of uncertainty and anxiety. You can have each one of those and not have fear, right? So if you are anxious but not uncertain, that would be, I have to give this presentation on Monday. I hope it's good. I'm nervous about it, right? That's, but there's nothing uncertain about it. It's Monday, it's at 2:00. I know what I'm going to do. I'm nervous about it, okay? Uncertainty without anxiety, well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve, okay? I mean, but it's when you combine the two that you start to generate fear. Well, the idea is if you have fear, if you have uncertainty plus anxiety and it start to manifest into fear, the key is to understanding which of those two factors can you buy down, okay? Anxiety...
Buy down?
Buy down, which means decrease. Anxiety can be decreased internally. It's an internal response, right? So things like some of the tools Huberman talks about, visual tools, breathing tools. You can begin to shift your physiology out of your sympathetic into your parasympathetic, come off of the autonomic response system, right? So that's how you can start, kind of buying down anxiety. Uncertainty is largely external, okay? That means something around you, outside of you, you don't understand. There's unknown. The best way to do that, and the way we do it in Spec Ops, is we control what we can control. So some people have referred to it kind of control your 3-foot world, right? But it doesn't have to extend. It's not a 3-foot thing. It's what in this moment can I control, and then take control of that, right? Because then you are grabbing onto certainty. You're taking what is uncertain. You're grabbing onto something certain. As soon as you've controlled that, as soon as you move through that, then you have to make another decision. What's the next thing? This is basically kind of stepping through, right? Stepping through this challenge, right? So you can start to practice coming off of fear or moving through fear by kind of understanding both of those pieces.
What do you think is the greatest lesson you learned throughout the 20 years for yourself that has helped you not only during that but also after being with the SEALs? I think
it's not fearing the unknown. It's the idea that I when you go through something like that, you understand that, hey, I can pretty much do whatever I'd like to do, and I know that even though I don't know how I'm going to do it, I know I can figure it out if there's enough interest, if there's enough passion, right? I'm not interested in becoming a pro football player,
Right.
So that's off my list, right? But I was interested in writing a book, and that was a whole new process for me. When I left the Navy, I started public speaking. I did not like public speaking at all, right? I did not like it, but I knew it was an edge that I wanted to conquer, and say, okay, well, let me work through the things to conquer this edge. Kind of like your philosophy. I think it's not only a deep one, but it's profound because if we are consistently deciding what our edges are, moving towards our edge, and then getting there. Then we are growing, because guess what we're doing at that point? We're looking for the next edge, and that's the growth process. It's continuing to move to our edges and then finding the next edge.
I mean, you say you don't like public speaking, but don't you have to speak to your teams and guys?
Yeah, but that's not public. That's like, really? That's the guys. So it's not
different.
The same. It's different. Yeah, it's different. There's a lot more, when you're, because you're and when you're in the military, there's no expectation of kind of great articulation or humor or
just
or
what's
intellectual.
effective.
Yeah, it's just
what's
like,
effective.
Hey, here's the word. Here's what we need to do, right? And that's what's appreciated too. There's like no one wants you to sit there and pontificate. It's like, hey guys, this is what's going on. So there's a directness that's appreciated and required, So, but that's not public speaking.
What do you think was the hardest lesson you had to learn through your 20 years? Something that you were struggling with or challenged with, or you kept repeating until you finally learned the lesson?
Yeah, I think the hardest lesson, maybe not one, the hardest lessons were just around leadership. What it takes. What it takes to be a leader. Because again, being a leader and being in charge are often conflated. They're not the same thing. Okay.
What's the difference?
Well, anybody could be in charge. As an officer, in the military, I was pretty much in charge of something all the time. It didn't make me a leader. You don't get to call yourself a leader. It's like calling yourself funny or calling yourself handsome. Okay. Someone else makes that decision. You can't designate yourself that way. Someone else decides whether or not you are a leader, okay? And that's done through the way you behave in that position. So if you're in charge and you're behaving in a way that causes someone to make a decision, okay, this is the person I would lead. I mean, if we think about the leaders in our lives, the people who we consider leaders in our lives, it's not because they were just in charge of us. In fact, we could probably think of people who we would follow into hell and back, and they have no place in the hierarchy of our lives, right? They are just someone who they've behaved that way in a way that's made us kind of endeared to them. So the attributes I talk about in the book in terms of leadership attributes are all attributes that actually cause behaviors that typically cause people to look at others as leaders.
What are the behaviors that most human beings admire the most, that we want to follow that person or be inspired to be led by something that they're sharing or involved in, a community, a movement, whatever it may be? What are the 3 or 4 main behaviors that they have and we should be developing if we want to be better leaders?
Yeah, well, I talk about 5 in the book in terms of these attributes. The first is empathy, okay? And again, I would say this, there's not an exclusivity in terms of what someone will decide, because there are people who will look at...
Subjective, right?
It's a subjective thing. Again, it's someone's choice as to whether or not they think. So empathy is one. Selflessness is another. And this is not just... so let's just back up here. Empathy, not just I know how you feel, I feel how you feel, right? I can put myself into your shoes, and that reflects in the way I communicate with you, and I care about. It shows that you care about another human being.
What is the best way to show that? I mean, give me an example. As opposed to saying I know how you feel, how do you empathize showing you feel how they feel?
Well, first, deep listening. And so listening to another person, but true, like deep, full on, like listening. Like I am hanging on every word, listening. Oftentimes we listen to people, and one of two things is happening. Either we're thinking about what we're going to say next, right? Or we're thinking about how what that person is saying relates to our lives. And it's not from a malicious standpoint. It's really because we're trying to relate. So we're trying to say, okay, you're talking about football, and I'm thinking, okay, wait a second, I played football in 8th grade, maybe I could talk about that.
Relate, yeah.
But what I'm doing is I'm not listening to you anymore. I'm making what you're saying about me. So what deep empathetic listening is, I have like a whiteboard in my mind, okay? And as I'm listening to you speak, if something pops onto the whiteboard, I erase it and I move on. I just keep on listening. That is, if you empathetically listen, like look into someone's eyes, attentive behavior, facing each other, they are going to feel cared for because you're exchanging. Now there's an exchange going on. There's serotonin being released. There's oxytocin being exchanged, or at least released, and all these kind of these bonding chemicals, right? So that type of listening shows someone you care about them. Empathy is a little bit tougher for some. Some people are just wired. We know some people are wired to be. My wife is extraordinarily empathetic. I mean, she really feels other people. I mean, I am not. I've had to really try to develop empathy. It's something that she's taught me. She hasn't taught me how to do it because you can't teach someone attributes, but she's inspired me to kind of develop it.
If you want to know how to win any negotiation, then make sure to check out this powerful interview with former FBI negotiator Chris Voss.
Never take advice from anybody you wouldn't trade places with. Criticism is a form of advice, but you're afraid to tell people how to do stuff, so you just criticize what they do.